Hello, everyone gathered here and people who have joined online. Welcome to our panel number 13, Technology, Data, and Urban Governance. Um, with all this yellow light and our digestive system competing with the brain for oxygen, it's hard to focus. But I guess for this session, we better pay attention because AI is coming for all of us. All right, so let's get started. Um, so I think we have a very interesting uh, set of inquiries, five papers lined up. And um, when I was going through the abstracts, there are a few things I noticed. And I think it'll be good to share that with you because we can all kind of look at these presentations with that context. Um, I think all of these research ideas, papers, projects look at um, technology and tech systems in the context of urban planning, urban governance in some way or the other, and um, it's it's very interesting to see the whole landscape. Um, I mean, the diversity of these connections across these five papers. Some of them are things that are already happening, like they are talking about what's happening, and some of them give us a glimpse of what might be coming. Right, so it's good to see um, how these ideas and think about how the future might be shaping up. Another thing I noticed was almost all of them have this strong notion of scale um, over space and sometimes time. And it's interesting how these urban systems are connected with tech and data across different scales, right? I felt it comes back as a constant theme across these papers. Um, the other thing was um, how some of these ideas may be related to the existing inequality structures and how it may transform the society, mainly in terms of the people's experiences. So some of the papers very explicitly articulated, but some hint at it in different ways. So these things will be very interesting to observe when we hear them. So let's jump into the presentations. Um, I think all the participants are already aware of the rules. So the first segment will have a 12-minute um, segment each for each of the teams to present. So the first paper, Tanvi, can you please help me with who should go first? Okay, Nitya, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you to the IHS for, I think, especially for a very thought provoking call for papers. Um, my paper is titled Microfinance Rebellions in a Silk Producing Town: How Biometric Linked Data Capture is Subverting Resistance by 1,000 women at this site and by millions of women across India. In March of 2009, hundreds of women in Ramnagara, Karnataka, walked to the DC office and with sacks full of microfinance loan cards and threw them there. And a few days later, mosques across the town announced that they forbid all Muslim women from repaying microfinance loans. 16 years later, in March of 2015, there were auto rickshaws circling Ramnagara spreading information about a new law in the Karnataka parliament that banned microfinance companies from enforcing repayment. And this kind of solidified a series of defaults that was already existing in the town. And what I'm doing in my paper is trying to compare these two periods of resistance, and with the idea that debt resistance can be seen as a complex and multi-layered expression of values. It's something that connects global financial systems and digital infrastructures with national and subnational policy and politics. It can tell us about socially regulated structures of capital accumulation, about intra-household resource sharing, also about bodily agency and mental well-being, about ideas of honor and mobility. It's about power asymmetries over time. It's about how inequalities are created and sustained, but then in these acts of rebellion, also how they can be challenged. And in terms of methods, I was first an intern in a microfinance company in 2008. I did fieldwork again on the microfinance crisis in 2010. I was a PhD student there 2013 to 2015, then in 2018, and then 2024 to 2025. So I'm kind of bringing together work done over the last 17, 18 years in different spells. I did mostly qualitative research, semi-structured interviews with many stakeholders, but also I've been doing an analysis of microfinance investor calls. So what is their discourse, reading sector reports, policy documents, and watching their webinars, following their debates. In terms of geographies of power in Indian microfinance, just to go back to what is microfinance, it is loans being made to low-income women by banks and non-banking financial companies, and the women are they are not required to provide collateral, but the collateral is that they take guarantee for each other's loans. And so what this was, it came with the Grameen model, and there was already a self-help group model giving bank loans to women, but this brought in lending at a much higher rate, at 25% per year. And but while the Grameen model had this idea that international investment was going to come into microfinance, it ended up being very much the same banking funds from India. More than 50% comes from the banks and the state. And so it's about hierarchies that are about urban and rural inequality being reproduced, about caste inequalities being reproduced, about class and gender. In Ramnagara, just for a bit of context, there are hundreds of silk producing units, and workers are held with debt. They are mostly from Muslim and scheduled caste Hindu households. They are doing this low paying and stigmatized work. And there's a lot of uncertainty in the industry. When microfinance entered, it kind of papered over an existing crisis. And initially, silk reeling employers were happy that people were getting this credit because that allowed their employees to manage. But then two things happened. One is that they started to repay their advances and were kind of freed temporarily from bondage. And so the employers felt threatened. At the same time, the soon after, people just became overwhelmed with this microfinance debt. And so they ended up going back to the same employers, asking for higher advances to be able to manage that, and also reporting that they were forced to sell their assets, forced to sell their children even. And enter into sex work and different things. And so this was the background in which there was a lady who was a small scale money lender who was also a microfinance borrower, and she used this money to make loans. But she also worked in a silk reeling factory owner's house, and this man was also a religious leader. And so there were all these things came together, and she spoke to him about these problems, and they together organized the protest that I was telling you about at the start. And then with this, people stopped repaying, and other scholars found that actually nutrition deprivation and stress reduced a lot. And even though there were a lot of negotiations, they never really managed to get people to repay what was owed at that time. They stopped lending in that area, but eventually it restarted. Some things that happened afterwards is that the RBI imposed lending limits, capped interest rates, which were earlier higher than 35%. But they also linked microfinance loans to credit information company CRIF Highmark, which works like Sybil. So to understand what's happening now, we need to understand what happened during the pandemic, which is that there was a moratorium, like all other bank loans, delays were permitted, but then interest was levied through that period. Loans increased a lot in debt increased in through that period, and then what they did is refinance the loans, so just lent more, and then people were obliged to repay that higher amount. But with also other forms of mounting debt, they were just not able to manage. And so then by 2024, we see that after this period of pumping in money into this landscape already ridden with debt, defaults rose again. And early in 2025, there was Karnataka-wide protests, people saying that there were a number of suicides. I think the one thing that was the turning point is that somebody posted her Mangal Sutra to the chief minister and said, "I hold you responsible for the death of my husband," after intimidation by a microfinance loan officer. And when the auto rickshaws were circling Ramnagara soon afterwards, this was the message that they were playing, that there's now that there has been a response to that call to be protected. And so loan officers actually faced harsh penalties if they entered, if they put pressure on people to repay, and so repayments dropped further. They were already patchy. But what people found is that even though they had this state protection to say that you won't face harassment, when they didn't repay, they were indefinitely barred from all other formal sources of credit using the credit information company records. And so people now have debt worth thousands of rupees that are equivalent to many years of income, and they are now seeking credit even from microfinance lenders, but they're not able to get it. They've been taking high interest loans to repay their debt in the hope of clearing their records. Young people are entering the silk industry where they said they wouldn't previously. People are losing gold at a time when gold prices are going through the roof. So really a scary thing. And there's sleeplessness, loss of appetite, anxiety. People are leaving the town. And it's to take a look at what was happening with the state in terms of how they were supporting microfinance lenders at this time. In 2020, they had what's called an on-tap liquidity scheme. So they were offering subsidized credit to the microfinance lenders. In 2021, they offered a credit guarantee in which they took responsibility that if banks lent to microfinance institutions to further lend, if the companies defaulted, the government would take responsibility. In 2022, they removed the interest rate caps and increased the lending limits for microfinance. And so they brought a flood of capital into the sector, and that's what allowed this refinancing to happen. And in fact, in 2023, the microfinance conference was tagged marching into Amrit Kal at 25 years. And so this was very much like the sentiment of this spectacular recovery. These were the kinds of words that were being used, and microfinance lending doubled what it was prior to the pandemic even. So there was this is something dramatic that happened. And then again, there was this wave of defaults. And so even the crisis that companies are facing is actually much more dire because it's a larger amount. And now the state is now the microfinance companies are negotiating with the state for budget 2026. They want a credit guarantee worth 20,000 crores. So they're saying that this will be a way to kind of restart microfinance lending, rescue the sector. So just to have to kind of take a step back and look at what this credit bureau disciplining means. It's we see that microfinance borrowers were identified by the national databases, and so even if loan officers are not coming to their doorstep, there's this kind of remote hold on them. But they are not able to mobilize and take their grievances to the national level. And this kind of goes back to the arguments that people against Aadhaar were making, that having a biometric identity, which is now being linked, whereas previously the credit information companies were not allowed to use Aadhaar directly, they still managed to kind of match back to the fact to ration cards and other things that you could see, voter IDs, you could connect it to Aadhaar. But now, in the last year, they're allowing microfinance companies to collect the last 4 digits of the Aadhaar also, which is kind of going against the 2018 Aadhaar ruling. And so then that's even more precise in terms of how companies can target people. And so I think this is also really a case that supports the early anxieties of people and kind of the reasons why they were organizing previously. And so we understand how the body is scrutinized your fingerprint, and it's not something you can escape as a provider of data that is being utilized by the state and private entities. So I think this is. Um,
We will take questions towards the end. So if anybody in the online audience has questions, please post them on this Q&A sections. We can move to the next participant.
So I'm presenting today on AI-driven real-time urban resilience assessment, or we also can abbreviate it as Aurora framework for specifically for Delhi, but it's easily replicable anywhere in the globe in any city. So I am Aditya Maheshwari presenting, and I have my co-author also Chetna Katre has joined here. So the idea here is simple. Instead of doing resilience as one-time report, we make it a live system like a health monitor for the city. Moving on to next slide.
Moving on, urban resilience beyond bounce back. Urban resilience is not only recovery after a shock. It's the ability to absorb disturbance, adapt, and still function. Earlier, we had traditional engineering resilience returning to normal, but today we use adaptive resilience system adjust socially, ecologically, and economically. So our core idea is resilience is not just bouncing back; it is bouncing forward.
Moving on to the next slide. Introducing you to uh, how we are using artificial intelligence here in for helping map the urban resilience, as well as what term we use to identify urban resilience as. So we use four definitions or four ways in which the AI is used for mapping urban resilience, which are first one is machine learning, second one is natural language processing, third one is predictive analysis, and the fourth one is the computer vision. So machine learning actually we use machine learning to predict and map very complex and multi-dimensional patterns which we find in cities as well as in the parameters of urban resilience. And natural language processing, we use it here for translating technical data into narrative, for translating like say social media data, tweets, Reddit data into points or scores. And predictive analysis is subset of machine learning which we use to forecast future states from historical patterns. And computer vision is also a way to analyze imagery, satellite imageries, as well as identify patterns from visuals or videos as well.
The AI resilience energy. Urban resilience is data rich but interpretation heavy. The problem is it is too much data but difficult to convert into insights. So, AI helps by enabling real time monitoring, scalable pattern detection, and multi stakeholder narratives. So, Aurora moves from periodic reporting to a living intelligence system.
Okay. So now what's the urban resilience challenge which we currently face? So cities in India, we are unable to map and monitor sufficient amount of data which is already available with us, through which we all gather in real time through various data sources, be it social media data, be it the Google Maps or any maps network data or various other examples. So traditional assessment limitations were they were statics and survey based, whereas the data opportunity we currently are missing is de-escalating the availability of the open and near real-time data, and the need for new approaches can make the whole assessment multi-scalar, dynamic, in real time. So introducing to what the ARU-RA platform, or the AI-driven real-time assessment resilience platform. So it's a data and AI-enabled methodology that evaluates, visualizes, and interprets resilient conditions for urban regions in real time through continuous monitoring and dynamic assessment. Here, the core innovation is integration of multiple open data sources, which we normalize to a scale of 0 to 1, a spatial scale of 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer grid, and continuous real-time updates, as well as predictive nature, as well as utilizing the predictive nature of artificial intelligence and the natural language processing capabilities. So, moving on, this is a brief screenshot of the platform, which I'll elaborate later on. So the positioning is kept as bringing different concepts together. The first one is what to measure and how to measure, and which will be giving us the actionable insights or deeper insights into the urban resilience or the current state of the urban resilience in the city. So this is the conceptual framework showing how we map and score the parameters. So we take three parameters defined by IPCC, which the first one is exposure, second one is sensitivity, and the third one is the adaptive capacity. And we use a simple mathematical formula in which we take the maximum and minimum value to normalize the values into a scale of 0 to 1, and then finally convert them to a score of 1 to 100. And the weightages we have applied to the training of the AI models, we kept it for 40% for the exposure, 20% for the sensitivity, and 41% again for adaptive capacity. The weightages can be fine tuned and changed on later on based on the outcomes of the AI model which is being trained. So the convergence is that the data is in abundance, the models are currently static, and interpretation is missing, which this platform currently solves. So this shows a brief about what are the 16 or what are the 18 different real-time indicators from various different 10 different sources, which include open metro data, which is weather data, Google Earth Engine data for NDVA, LST, NASA black marble imagery, as well as firms imagery for active fire detection, OpenStreetMaps, TomTom for traffic, World Pop, and various other platforms. So this table basically shows what are the different indicators, what they measure, and how what is the frequency and how we transform them in our platform. So the dashboard is currently live at this displayed website on aditmaishi.co.in, and it's basically built on Next.js, which is a very fine-tuned coding language hosted on Vercel, which utilizes OpenStreetMap for base map and the real-time data pipeline integration. Currently, due to data limitations and huge cost of AI, the data is stored in form of cache data, and which can be which can be further on made real time as well as depending on the availability. So the user can click on any cell, search for different places, their GPS location can be caught upon, and AI can summarize the data and export the data grid wise into the report format. So the target user here are urban planners and policymakers, emergency response teams, citizens, anyone who needs insight on urban resilience in the city. So I'll take you to the platform uh, and as well as the technical implementation. So there are four different steps in which the data is gathered and presented on the platform. The first one is the acquisition. The data is acquired from various different APIs or application programming interface, which present us real-time data as well as stored data in the form of cache. We then normalize it on the scale of 0 to 1 with minimum maximum scaling, and then aggregate the different parameters in three different categories, and visualization and processing is done through AI, and the AI is basically used here for predicting the score as well as turning the prompts into natural language, which the data into readable language for the model. So traditional approach basically integrated static hazard maps. Here we use real-time monitoring, and instead of post-event surveys, here we are using continuous assessment, and instead of delayed response, we use proactive intervention. And instead of limited stakeholder access, we have multi-stakeholder platform. Anyone can access this platform, and citywide aggregate. And instead of that, we are using it for neighborhood level precision. I'll take you to the platform. I'll hope my screen is still visible. The platform is live here on this website. I'll open the website. So this platform basically first loads the data which is stored in the form of cache, which we can also make it near real time after the API limitation is removed from the platform. So here we see a map of Delhi, which is divided into 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer grid. Each grid stores data for different parameters, and when I'll click on, let's say, and yeah, also the index shows the regions which are having the poorest urban resilience index, as well as region with the highest urban resilience index. Let's say I'll click on any place. Let's say this is a red cell which is lying near the Yamuna river, where the flooding happens almost every year. So this cell analysis shows data in three different categories. We are looking currently at the exposure. So the exposure has the different parameters like rainfall, how much is it? It is heat index, wind, the PM 2.5 pollution, the different pollutants, nearby fires, if there has been any incidents in the past, or is there anyone posting on social media, it also gathers that. What is the soil moisture and alerts from various different government platforms. In capacity, we also have different parameters like what is the TTI index, traffic TTI index for this current cell, what are the ingredients, what is the essential open gap, how much is the percentage of open spaces, what is the accessibility to the healthcare, and presence of green space as well as nightlight stability. Then coming to the third parameter, which is sensitivity, we look at NDVI normally. We look at how much there is a variation in NDVI across in the different cells across the city. Then looking at the LST anomaly, which is again important for mapping the sensitivity, nightlight drops, and population density. So combining them, we have a score from 0 to 100. So this cell shows currently, for example, 31.9 score, and the score is in itself is a prediction of the AI model which was trained upon data of for different cities, and the file was
Sorry,
saved
sorry
as.
to interrupt, Aditya.
Yeah,
Uh,
sure.
we have run out of time. So, were you
Okay,
planning to
okay.
cover anything else?
No,
Like,
no, it's almost done. It's almost done.
okay, so if you
Yeah,
can quickly wind up in a few seconds,
sure,
that would
sure.
be great.
So anyone can visit this platform. In the about section, it's the elaboration for the methodology and the data sources has already been done. So thank you, jury members. Will now stop my presentation.
Thanks, Aditya and Chetna.
Yes.
We'll come back to you later for questions. So let's move on to the next participant. This is titled Objects of Memory, AI and the Embodied Perception of Urban Space. Yeah, Aveline Thomas and colleagues, please go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Can everyday objects act as mediators between perception and urban meaning? How do chairs, kiosks, benches, or temporary stalls carry gestures, routines, and affections that construct the memory of a city? And most importantly, how might computational tools help us read these processes without flattening or controlling them? These questions shape this research. The paper is titled Objects of Memory, and it explores how AI can be used not to optimize cities, but to interpret how urban meaning is formed through lived embodied experience. This work begins from a simple observation. Cities become vibrant and meaningful when objects are allowed to communicate. Everyday artifacts, often overlooked, carry layers of association. They store moments, routines, and social agreements. When we read the city through its objects, they become storytelling devices, not decorative details, but repositories of shared memory and experience. This research is set in Istanbul, a city shaped by overlapping empires, migrations, and erasures. Here, public space is constantly renegotiated. Formal planning often clashes with lived practice. In this context, objects act as instruments of continuity. A bench carries traces of municipal order and informal occupation. A vendor cart becomes a mobile architecture of survival. These are not anecdotes, they are data, evidence of how memory, power, and space intersect. To explore this systematically, we began mapping where objects appear in the city. Using ArcGIS, we identified distributions of everyday objects and extracted their coordinates. From these, over 22,000 Google Street View images were scraped. We then trained a custom object detection model based on you look only once, using objects frequently found in Istanbul, such as chairs, benches, parasols, kiosks, and balconies, to name a few. Okay. Here, machine learning acts as a lens, not a replacement for perception. The aim was not automation, but to surface spatial patterns that are difficult to see through observation alone. But cities are not only visual, they are also read through language. We treated the city as a multidimensional book shaped by literature, fiction, and personal narratives. These texts written about Istanbul were analyzed to extract sentences referring to objects and public space. Words like bench, lamp, or balcony were examined alongside terms related to memory, emotion, and belonging. These sentences were then vectorized and mapped using a self organizing map, allowing connections between objects, spaces, and effect to emerge. Objects were now visible in both physical and linguistic space. To translate these associations spatially, generic 3D object models were rendered using stable diffusion. Each object was prompted with a sentence drawn from Istanbul's literature. For example, one of the prompts read as follows: they had a fine house on the Bosporus with a large balcony almost covered by Virginian creepers. And here, going by in the steamer, I often caught a glimpse of their heads as they sat on the balcony at work or afternoon tea. This produced a collection of objects that were not generic, but culturally inflected, carrying atmosphere, memory, and narrative. To test this framework spatially, a segment of a popular shopping street in Istanbul, the General Asim Gundu Street, was reconstructed using photogrammetry. Detected objects such as fountains, the bench, the awning, the storefront were reimagined using text to 3D models. We used a model called Shapey that allowed us to generate 3D objects using text and images as inputs. Using the text that correspond to these objects as prompts, we generated images and then created a final image, which was then converted into a point cloud and subsequently a mesh model. Importantly, we also examined the area of influence of these objects using image segmentation. Objects do not occupy space neutrally, they shape behavior, visibility, and social interaction. A rather ordinarily looking space paves way to something unique, emphasizing the role of objects as contributors to public narrative because objects encode power. They reveal who is allowed to linger, who is displayed, and whose memory persists. Rather than creating outputs as prescriptions, the project positions them as provocations. So here the objects were clustered using the self-organizing map as a guide to spatially compose it, and narratives were projected onto walls, combining sentences from surrounding object spaces. The objects are created from text to 3D and are enhanced further by adding characteristic features and materiality based on the text. Here you can see that in order to design the kiosk, we took sentences that correspond to the kiosk, but we also looked at cells around the kiosk, which included street, mosque, table, a fountain, and a restaurant. So all these contributed to how the kiosk was finally designed. And using ChatGPT, we compressed the combined sentences and generated a prompt that reflect the most characteristic elements of the text that we got. We used the sentences to create a point cloud and then a mesh model, and which was fed into Midjourney in order to visualize it more cleanly. The new object is further enhanced by adding characteristic features and materiality based on the text. So 28 such objects were designed. AI here becomes a collaborator and not authority. It reveals patterns, but it reveals patterns, and meaning still requires situated interpretation. The narrative of these objects is visualized by creating a scene on a wall that combines sentences of cells around the objects and the cells that the walls run along as well. So, for example, when you look at the fountain, sentences that contribute to the prompt would be those of the street, coffee, graffiti, and a bar. So the scene of the wall is generated by combining all of the prompts of the objects to get an initial image. Using segment anything, that is the image segmentation model, the individual segments corresponding to the objects are generated using prompts of the objects themselves, emphasizing the extent of influence that these objects impart to its environment. Since each cell in the self organizing map has n dimensions, since we had a lot of material to work with in order to produce our prompts, which added more character to the objects themselves. So a seemingly normal scene starts to communicate in a fun and quirky manner. This was done for all other object clusters as well, and this was what it looked like, which in turn, the final product became a public installation where people can interact with these objects and contexts that they have created for themselves. It is placed in a busy public square, frequented by tourists and residents alike. These objects became embodiments of descriptions that allowed to integrate historical and contemporary narratives within the existing urban fabric. The result is not a solution, but rather an acknowledgement that these objects act as carriers of memory, inviting interaction and reflection. This work makes or tries to make two key contributions. First, it expands experimental urbanism beyond planned interventions to include everyday material practices as forms of vernacular experimentation. Second, it proposes a critically reflective use of AI, where computation augments human interpretation rather than flattening lived experience. The city emerges not as a data set to optimize, but as a living archive continuously written by bodies, objects, and memory. To conclude, this project asks how we might design and read cities with greater care. Care for what communities already know, care for what resists computation, and care for the uncontrollable dimensions of urban life. Istanbul becomes both subject and metaphor, a city where memory and modernity coexist in tension, read through the eyes of people and algorithms alike. Thank you.
Thank you, Avleen. Let's quickly move on to the next presentation, which is titled Urban Flood Vulnerability and Spatial Resilience, a Multi-Parametric Modeling Framework. Uh, Deepthi and colleagues, please go ahead.
Yeah. Good afternoon. I'll be presenting urban flood risk assessment, vulnerability, and a spatial resilience. So, my presentation is actually a focus on design strategies, how to come risk-free design, built area, and environment. So on top of carrying forward, so the context I took for this approach is Chennai, because I live in Chennai and I've been seeing a lot of floods occurring years ago. 2015 it was a vulnerable flood. I was also being experienced those floods those times. It was really severe. And again, it was a recent flood called Ditwa. It was again a very severe flood. Water clogged entire city and got drained in 3 days. Still, the schools and other institutional spaces are really in vulnerable condition. So on talking those parameters, so I would like to touch how Chennai actually aligns. So this is actually a coastal corridor, and this is a main city of Chennai. Due to the urban sprawl, where the people migrate from places and settle back in Chennai for education and various purposes, personal reasons. So this is how the Chennai development happens. So basically, there is a north, south, east, west corridors. Everywhere, if you see, there is a urban sprawl happening. I'll just go in deep about urban sprawl. Yes. So to touch what are all the main canals, rivers, and the lakes in Chennai are Adayar, Kuvam, Buckingham Canal, and Kosataliyar. So these are all the major longest canals are in Chennai. And these are all the widest lakes in Chennai. You can see Red Hills, Chembarakbakam, Ennur, and Ambattur. So these are all the lakes, existing lakes. And again, this is a coastal region where the Buckingham Canal runs throughout the coastal line. So, whenever the flood happens, if you see the recent news, mainly the Chembarabakam area, they opens the dam out, and the entire village and the settlements are in a severe flood conditions. Again, coming back to the coastal region, the same. Also, the Adayar Kuvam River, also a vulnerable condition. It's in a vulnerable condition. So naturally, Chennai aligns with the topography. This is actually a coastal line, so this would be the level of zero, and the slope angle continues from zero to a toppest elevation. Yes. So the evolution of Chennai in 1633 was only the spread of this boundary. Slowly, the migration happens and the urban sprawl happens, and the resilience gets settled down with some slum development also happens in the North Madras. And this red part is actually a migration and the settlement of urban sprawl in 2010. Slowly, if you can see, the blue part is emerging, and now the entire Chennai is actually in urban sprawl. So this is actually a concentric circles where how Chennai CMA boundary is getting extended and further is extending to the situation. So this is actually a 2026 CMDA proposed land use plan, where if you see the open space, the blue-green infrastructures are getting lower and lower, and the built environment, industries and institutions or other built non-structural elements are getting heavier and heavier. So since there is a flood event happens, there is no channel for water to escape because of the dense settlement also with the urban sprawl. So I took a methodology to address or to take an approach of a framework in three categories. The stage one is with GIS, stage two is with machine learning validation, and stage three with building level simulations. So the choice of my stages are interrelated to each other. So stage one is actually interrelated to machine learning to validate whatever the hotspots we require from GIS and how it can be rectified or minimalized with the building level simulations. That is how the framework and approach I wanted to discuss it. So always the flood has a lot of parameters. Say for example, I've identified 45 parameters. I've just displayed few here. So it was categorized into controllable parameter and non-controllable parameters. So non-controllable parameters are rainfall, geometry, climate, sea level, rise, tidal dynamics. These we don't have a control or we can't do anything. It's naturally occurring. But then if it is a controllable parameters like setbacks, street widths, layouts, plinth height, drainage capacity, development, FSI, FAR. So these are all the things where you can control in a micro scale level. So I just wanted to scale. I've just referred to a lot of literature studies. They addressed all this flood risk in a macro scale level to the city context. Whereas I don't see much of the paper concentrating on micro scale level. So I just wanted to touch upon a micro scale level as I fall into architecture. So I took machine learning as actually a new emerging trend for urban flood management. So here I've just categorized four different platforms. One is for a data collection, high resolution data collection, where you can just get it in Central and One and all those softwares, where that can be mapped using GIS with categorizing the major controllable parameters and validate it with the machine learning. So after doing all this, the simulation part takes a role where the digital twin platforms and the climate responsive SDG goals. I just wanted to align my research direction towards it. Yes. So this is actually a framework of stage one and two. Stage one is GIS mapping, and stage two is validating your data using machine learning. So, and assembling all the data put together, superimposing it, and putting into a simulation software to run and know how vulnerable floods can appear in future, or whatever the predictions we can make using the simulation software in building scale. So here I built level simulation models where I just wanted to develop a model which is responsive to flood hazard framing, scale analysis, design variables, model relatability, building performance, as well as planning and governance. So say for example, let's just take one instance since we are running out of time. I just wanted to create a model and see what is the velocity, if we can just regulate a velocity and see how vulnerable the building condition would change. So after regulating the velocity or the flood levels or the depth or the building conditions, it can be based on a parameter called materials. You can use green walls. You can use you can apply various material. You can increase the permeability, decrease the permeability to see how the performance of the building happens while there is a severe flood. So, say for example, a few very few minor design strategies. I just wanted to put it in a light. Say for example, a green walls and increasing a permeability in setbacks. Say for example, if you're just putting a paved tile wall and putting your car parking over next to your building shaded. So these looks very great, but when it is in a flood, there is no water to escape because every water will be coming around and clogging into your building. So in order to increase the porosity, increase the permeability, or I would always like to go with the ground open or more, if you just wanted to more flood risk free, you can increase a sponsity concept. You can just build a small pockets so that you can just save water and use it for a later purpose, which will improve your health, improve indoor quality, promote biodiversity, and many others whatnot. Yes, to coming to the conclusion, urban flood vulnerability is actually a very serious issue, but it can be controlled if there is a planned design strategies to come up with. So I've just proposed the three framework: GIS, machine learning, and building level simulations to see how the building can perform, and it can take a flood risk by itself. So here the main focus on FSI and FAR, it is actually a floor space index and floor area ratio, where so according to bylaws, you have a road width, say for example, 4 meters of road width permits only 3 floor height of the building. So few people in Chennai, few majority cities in a globe, they doesn't follow FSI FAR and simply been in a flood risk, all the ground floors been risk and all the first floors, they couldn't even approach the roads due to the minimal setback and the street layout and the urban geometry. So I would always say there should be a ratio of open space and also a built space, which is actually missing in an urban context. In order to align with SDG 11 to reduce the disaster risk, I would say the policy and the governance can take measures on including the design strategies, including a green wall, permeability, increasing open space and closed space ratio to be worked on with to reduce a micro scale level flood risk assessment. Thank you.
Thank you, Deepthi.
Thanks.
Moving on to the next presenter. The title is Beyond the Firm, the Spatial Regime of Labor Control in Kerala Software Cluster. Shonima, over to you.
Okay. Okay, good afternoon, all. First of all, I thank IHS and Urban for accepting my paper and giving me this opportunity. It's a very interdisciplinary audience, I hope, and I get such kind of vibe from the earlier presentation. And this particular presentation uh, looks into the labor question, actually. So, since the Urban Arc this time deals with contested terrain, space, place, and scale, my scale is different. That looks into the scale of control, such kind of thing. And the contested terrain here is labor control. Okay. So when we looks into the labor question in political economy, we have different literature that comes from labor process theory, labor regime theories, GCC theories, GVC theories, GPN theories, and so on. So, simply speaking, the LPT and labor regime theories come from Marxian background, and they look how does the labor uh, is controlled in a capitalist production process, and they position the class conflicts and structured antagonism at the center. And when it comes to GCC, GVC, they looks into the governance aspect. So when we looks into the critical literature that is come from LPT, labor regime, and the recent GPN 2.0 literature, they say that uh, it's high time to integrate all this framework. That is, consider the class relation at the heart of GVC, GCC, and GPN literature. At the same time, consider the structure, that is the global, national, and regional dynamics at the center of labor process analysis. And when we look into the literature, we can see empirical studies from manufacturing and agriculture background that looks how labor governance in the case of this GCC, GVC, and GPN literature, and how the labor control when it comes from the LPT background, how labor is basically controlled by the global dynamics, and how the national and regional political economy, and how does the national and regional labor market affect, and on that basis how the labor control is shaped, how the control is institutionalized, and how the control is stabilized. So that is the recent literature from the manufacturing and agriculture. But when we look into the knowledge intensive sectors and knowledge intensive workers, we can see that the studies on workers come from managerial and organizational studies background, and they consider in a very different way to the labor of, I mean, to the knowledge workers. And when we look into the sociological and anthropological literature, most of the studies consider cultural normative control or identity and labor segregation based control, and the labor control through service level agreement. How does the technical control happen, and what kind of responsible autonomy or institutional context influence the labor process, and what kind of difference exists between global south and global north, and how far the mobility power influence the labor bargaining, and such kind of discussion that exists in sociology and anthropology literature of knowledge work. But the main limitation is that they consider all these analytical categories as a very segregated, analytically segregated one. So when we looks into the labor regime in the global production network in the manufacturing sector, we can say that all these are intervened, all these are interacting, and they are mutually constitutive. And we can say that the labor control is a spatial regime, and I'm planning to look that dimension into knowledge intensive workers. And my research question is, how does the labor control in outsourced software work operate as a multi-scalar phenomenon, and that how far it is a spatial regime that functions beyond the firm? So, as I mentioned earlier, I consider labor control as a spatial regime here, and it constituted through multi-scalar, relational, and dynamic process. And there are two dimension to it. That is, one is exploitation dimension that looks the structured extraction of surplus labor, and the second dimension is disciplining that refers to the regulation of labor, content, effort, and consent. So, this study is my part of PhD thesis, and the particular discussion was from the field study that I conducted as part of my PhD thesis. And following the tradition of labor process, I have conducted a qualitative embedded case study of a firm that here I named it as Tech Auto, and it is anonymized name. And this Tech Auto is located in Technopark, and for the purpose of the study, I have done semi-structured interview with various stakeholders like employees and trade union leaders, HR managers, and senior level managers, etc. And for the purpose of sampling, I adopted snowball sampling and purposive sampling. And October 2023 to May 2025 was my field study period, and I have done thematic analysis. And in addition to interviews, I have used Techoto's annual company report, documents from Labor Commissioner, IT Policy Act, and recent Labor Code to some extent. I just reviewed it, and newspaper report, and I anonymized the name of firm and employees for the purpose of confidentiality. And we can have discussion why this technopark and why this kind of peripheral or emerging cluster during our question answer session. And this is the main finding that we can discuss. Okay. So here, the exploitation comes through temporal control, wage theft, and labor segregation. And in the case of temporal control, actually, this particular firm is an outsourcing firm, and it provides software services to its client, that is OEM. And this OEM gave certain project, either very short-term project or long-term project. Some, it may be a very maintenance based project, such kind of thing, and there exists service level agreement, and there will be certain objective for certain project, and there will be time bounded, and that time bound will be explained in the service level. And this particular project is carried through a sprint model, that is the recent software lifecycle model that this firm adopt. And certain in certain sprint, they need to finish certain tasks, and the and such kind of module, I mean divided task is there. And this service level agreement, since there is sprint focus and everything, there will be extension of working working to the weekend, that kind of thing is there. And at the same time, during the sprint end, there will be extension of working time as well. And another important thing is there exists a all-time login expectation from the client and from the this particular firm. So the exists a global level dynamics that is, that diffuse into workplace dynamics. And when we looks into the regional and national political economy or the institutional background, in the case of regional scale, the firm supposed to submit standing order, that is the norms and rules of this particular firm that has to be submitted to the labor commission. And the firm doesn't submit that standing order to the labor commission, and Regarding the working hour, Section 6 of Shop and Commercial Establishment Act of Kerala is excluded the IT establishment. So this working hour extension is legitimate under the, I mean, labor law. And when we look into the labor code as well, though they says that 48 hours of working week per day, it also allows more than 8 hours of working. And in the national scale also, this particular firm is located in special economic zone, and SCS 2005 policy direct the regional labor commissioner not to inspect this firm on the regards of this, I mean, extension of working hours and such manner. And the category of worker is very contradicting in Indian scenario, because the software employees does not, I mean, most of the software employees from the position of a lead does not comes under the category of workers, because they comes under the category of managers, and the labor laws is not accept, I mean, applicable to these categories of workers. And as I mentioned earlier, there exists overtime, and this overtime never documented properly, because at the global dynamics, there exists fixed time kind of project, fixed time, fixed budget kind of thing. And uh, since there this kind of project exists, the overtime never documented. And as I mentioned earlier, the non-enforcement of standing orders and special economic zone also legitimate non a non inclusion of or non documentation of this kind of practices. And when we looks into the labor, segregation inside a team, there are various categories of employees like permanent, contract, interns, and all. And because the main objective is to finish certain tasks within very time frame, they also include billable and unbillable employees. And this kind of practices is allowed by the regional and national labor law, like standing the existing standing order. It was not given by this particular firm, but the only two firms in Kerala submitted standing order, and that standing order approves this kind of practices. And when we looks into the disciplining practices at the workplace, we can see various digital platform like work management platform, and they review and they see the entire work updates and everything. And the as I mentioned earlier, there exist blurred roles and responsibilities in the case of who is manager and who is engineers and such kind of thing. And in the case of
Sorry to
life
interrupt,
cycle,
Sonima.
yeah, yeah,
Sorry, we
yeah.
have run out of time.
Yeah.
Would you like to just summarize it in another 30 seconds or something?
Yeah, sure. So at the workplace, there exists digital platform, and there are very lateral relation through the shadow managers and such thing. And there exists very metrics for their performances. Like their rewards is on the basis of performance, and that appraisal is based on some bell-shaped curve. And as I mentioned earlier, the institutional context also legitimate this thing. So this is the very basic understanding. There exists a sourcing contracting relation that comes to the workplace, and the regional and national political economy that legitimate this thing. So similar to the manufacturing and agriculture, we can see a, a, a spatial regime that stabilizes and act across scale in the case of knowledge intensive workers also. So that's all.
Thanks, Sonima. Thank you, everyone, for sharing all these interesting ideas. We don't have too much time remaining. So I can quickly share a few questions, clarifications for each of the presenters. And then we can quickly open it up to everybody attending. I'll go in the same order. Um, you can respond after I talk about each of the presentations. Uh, to Nitya, I was wondering, I mean, like, it was a really comprehensive picture of what is happening in the place with respect to the resistance to the microfinance situation. Um, I don't know whether you briefly mentioned it, but I was wondering about the current situation. So, currently, do you see, like, I mean, you talked about the history, the historical development of the whole resistance and the kind of changes that happened. But at the moment, do you sense there is some collectivization, there is some political mobilization, and where is it seeming to be heading in the future? Would be very interesting to hear if you have also looked at that. Um, to Aditya and Chetna, um, that when you talked about the AI-driven framework for urban resilience assessment, it was a comprehensive set of variables, pieces of information that you put together. One thing I thought would have been nice to hear about is who this was for, right? So who are the beneficiaries? The people part was a little bit missing, I felt. So if you have already thought about, you know, who are the more vulnerable sections in these geographies, and in terms of, you know, wealth, income, caste, social, economic kind of indicators, if you if you have already thought of, or like, if you could imagine customizing some of these when you really operationalize these things, it'll be interesting to hear thoughts around that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and to Aveline, it was um, it was an amazing thing to see that the boundaries of real and imaginary are blurring, and it's such a flux. A very interesting mix, very unconventional mix of methods, I would say. Um, you did mention that you did not think of it as a planning tool, or like really as an implementation, maybe not yet, but still I can't resist asking whether you had any kind of initial thoughts on where this kind of a technology may go to. Like, I mean, when you try to operationalize it, when you try to implement something like this in the context of urban design planning, so what might be the possibilities, who might benefit, what may be the challenges, etc. To Deepthi, on the um, okay, yeah, we'll move to the next participant, Shonima. So this is one quick question regarding the method. If I got it correctly, you mainly interviewed several workers, 40 plus workers. Um, I felt like in the presentation, their voice was not coming out very clearly. So if you could take a minute to explain what their perspectives were, and how they were perceiving this whole multi-layered multi-spatial kind of a system, um, imposing these restrictions on them, and how that was synthesized into some of the conclusions you made. That will be interesting to hear. Apart from this, if you have the time and if you want to, I was also thinking if each of you could also reflect on how these pieces of AI, tech, digital systems, etc., um, like they going forward, if they get, I mean, some of them are already deployed and affecting people's lives, but some of these may reach there soon. So it'll be interesting to hear about how you're thinking of some sort of democratic control, like how would the society ideally deal with these kind of systems and tools and computational environments, to mainly in the perspective of how to ensure that these are not exacerbating existing inequalities and creating new ones, right? So some of you touched upon that a little bit, but if you want to articulate it more, that will be interesting to hear as well. I'll stop. Please go in the same order and respond. Nitya?
So I think in terms of what the situation is now, it's I think a kind of persistence of this debt distress that's been caused by or is being allowed by the data capture. And so I think what it is a lot of people have these loans outstanding from microfinance institutions. A lot of loan officers are just not coming to the areas because people are not repaying enough, so it's not worth their worth the company's time to send people there. Is there a lot of companies? Some people have borrowed expensively from other sources, repaid it, and so people are also strategically balancing between, okay, we'll pay back this loan, and then hope that we can borrow from this company again. But a lot of people have kind of like got their feet in two different places where they've paid back one loan by borrowing somewhere else, but then they have debt they still have a loan pending, and then now they can't borrow, but they have to pay back the debt they took to pay back the other loan. And so this is what's happening. The government is allowed or is integrating also self-help groups, uh, bank data into this Aadhaar linked database. And so now people are finding that even if they're looking at that lower cost credit as an alternative, that's not available to them. So this is some of what's happening. And I think one of the things they have in mind uh, in terms of doing something to change is, one question is if there is a credit guarantee for the state, at least in the short run, that to at least use a credit information record, a claim to have, or a request to have it cleared, so that at least if the lenders are getting this kind of state support, at least borrowers are also getting some assistance.
Thanks. Aditya, Chetna?
Yes, sir. Am I audible now?
Yes.
Yeah, actually, you very well mentioned that the indicators, we can narrow them down to uh, identify the problems with the different classes or different sectors of the society. So we, I think, already have many of the parameters available with us, but we can surely categorize them in different more categories. So to us to identify and get a deeper insight into the resilience of the city.
Sure. Thanks. Avi?
So, when we thought about how we could apply the tools that we sort of used, and the way we were thinking about the project and how it could reflect back into working practice or design in general, we thought this could be a starting point for when we look at design plans itself in like urban design schemes, so that we are working very well within digital platforms. So how does this sort of like tie into when start looking at design plans now? Because we are still very, very conventional when we look at design of spaces. So this can be an added tool or an added value when we start examining those ideas. um, I also think this could be an interesting way of how we understand digital media and how they sort of influence the place that we inhabit. Because although we live in like a physical space, a lot of our interactions are with digital space. So, how does one influence the other, and how does that back and forth um, behave is something that we could interrogate through this. And also, the method, I think, can bring forth a lot of disparity between like what's visible and what's not visible. So like surfacing patterns or surfacing things that are not too obvious is something that these tools could like help us and we could benefit from. So I think, yeah, these are some avenues they could help with. Yeah.
Thank you. Shonima, would you like to respond?
Thank you for pointing out this dimension. Because of the time constraint, I couldn't reflect on employees' narration and all. I went to the field with an expectation that they may be agitated or they may be hesitant to share their experiences because of they comes from the very so-called professional background and so on. But in fact, on the field, they were so happy and they were so relaxed to share their problems, concerns, and experience with the person who come from the non-field. I mean, not from an IT field, because in multiple times multiple people narrated that we could have share all this information with you because of you are not a IT employees. Otherwise we feel some kind of confidential issue, something like that. But since you are from a social science background, we feel so relaxed, we can share every our emotions, such kind of thing. And of course, the employees are completely aware of client dynamics, and they are completely aware of the time constraint comes from the client demand and global delivery model, such kind of thing. And the employees at the same time, they are also working with the client team as well, right? So they also say that we feel some kind of othering feel. We also we also need to do some emotional labor, because the firm always say that we need to be very polite, we don't need to argue with them. Such kind of dimension they mentioned a lot. And the employees are completely aware of the profit level of profit that the firm make, because they are aware that the client quoted a certain amount that will be much higher than the salaries and all those things. And another thing, when I have interview, I could say that the managers and the freshers, they are the most vulnerable people, because the leads, managers, they need to do the time bounded things. And in Indian scenario, in the current scenario, the managers are doing some technical work as well. I think when we look into the case of earlier literature, that was not the case. And when we looks into the layoff scenario also, the freshers as well as the managers, they are being laid off from the from the firms and all. Yeah.
Sorry, I think the point is clear. Thank you for sharing it. In the interest of time, sorry, I have to stop you there. So let's take questions now from the audience. If somebody has already posted questions online, we can go over that along with any questions people here in the room have. We can take, I think, 3 or 4 questions and then go to the panelists.
Uh, Hi, my name is Bajoy. Nitya, very interesting presentation. I was just wondering, since you have worked in that area for almost 20 years, one is what purposes was this loan serving? Did it, in your experience, did you see this leading to any sort of upward mobility, or were these all cases of distress? And also, the earlier part which you mentioned, 2009, where this option of going to DC's office and asserting in some way their citizenship, now that becoming digital. So in this digital era, do they just become an user, or they still retain some rights as citizens? uh, in your experience, how do you see that? uh, yeah, that's one. And for, I think, both Chennai's flood resilience and the Delhi model, I think Not a question, but a comment that I guess the best dashboards are that which could be printed on a paper are more useful. If not, then only we take that step. Aditya and Chetan, I think the Delhi dashboard uh, for 1500 square kilometer area, you have grids over the Yamuna River, over the ridge, over the airport. There is no traffic, not any building, nor any population. That's a huge gap. Also, there's no local data source. Uh, for Chennai, I think Deepti's model, it seems to be an ideal case scenario that using this, how do you plan the city? But the city is already built. Uh, then what do you do to fix it? In some ways, that model does not even take that into concern. If you can respond to that, would be great. Thank you.
Let's quickly go to other people who want to ask questions. And
Thank you. My questions for Evelyn. I hope I haven't misunderstood the objective of your project, but I was curious to know what you thought about. So, if you say that objects are essentially like stores of memories and people's experiences with the city, I'm curious about how you think that scales up to the experience of the city itself, right? So, in the sense that, do you feel like people's experiences of the city are built by kind of clustering together their experiences with individual objects, or do you think there's something a little bit like more abstract, a little like when you go to the scale of a city that uh, that kind of doesn't get captured by the techniques that you've used, right? Where there is an experience of the city that transcends that of individual experiences with specific objects, and if so, how would you kind of make that match with what you did in your project? I hope I made myself clear. I'm not quite sure if I'm clear myself.
I think the intent was to have some sort of grounding with the city and how you relate to it. So I think this is something that we don't explore often when we look at things that are designed for a city, or like when a city occurs, we don't really give a lot of importance as to how it came to be, but as a general overview of like what you feel about it or how it sort of communicates to you. But when you start looking at objects and how it starts relating to each one of us, so each one of us would have a different perspective or different sort of relationship to these objects. And when you look at it collectively, it's like a whole new realm of these interwebs that are created, and they sort of give a more uh, it moves on from the physical and goes into a more like embodied uh, nature of what the city is. And I think that's what we try to capture with the project. And with respect to like how people spoke about it and how people um, communicated, we primarily looked at written text, but I think a next step forward would be to look at um, dance forms or music or some other kind of art that sort of adds into this narrative. So I think it gives a more nuanced and a more poetic sort of understanding of the city, which is something that we don't usually look or like pay heed to a lot. We try to as much as we can, but I think this would be a more poetic way. Yeah.
thanks. Maybe in the interest of time, maybe we can take one last question. Or were there questions online?
I think a way to answer the question about loan being whether they can be productive or drive upward mobility or only distress, is to compare with the self-help group loans which are still being issued, but it's very much segregated by caste and class. So you can see landowners or from a dominant or intermediate class groups get caste groups get the self-help group loans, and then you can see that they are using it more for investment in business, livestock, these kinds of things. But it's become so much that microfinance is going to people who are landless or and lowered caste, and they are using it to manage with other kinds of loans. But it still serves a particular kind of purpose in that with the interest rate of 25% per year, it's much lower than many other loans that are available to people. And so it's like as long as you can manage repaying it on time, then it helps. But if you can't repay because microfinance is very inflexible, then you have to anyway borrow from another informal lender to make that absolute repayment. And so then that drives debt distress in a way. And I think that this question of staking a claim to citizenship and it being challenged by the database is, I think, the kind of the point I have in mind, that even though there was this mobilization with at state level, some kind of support, even then it seems like you have an ability to make a claim on the state, but then you don't actually in because of the national level enforcement.
Thank you, Nitya. We have run out of time. This was all very interesting, a lot of food for thought. So let's take a break and try to make peace with tech and AI. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.